Thank you, Jonathan, for the invitation again to come share the Torah with the summer with you. I was told the shir is chus for Rafur for Chaim Elazar ben Rachalea. We should have a Rafur Shlema the Kara of Mamish. I was asked by Rabbi Bliss to discuss the topic of sakana, of dangerous activities during the 3 weeks, and in particular dangerous activities for the rest of the year as well. So we're going to try to discover and learn the sugya of putting oneself in danger, not complicated things like danger in order to save somebody else's life, and doctors and first responders and things like that. But rather, we want to discuss the topic of doing activities, leisurely activities, fun activities, regular activities that come with the side of danger attached with it. And what is the halal, what does the Torah say in regards to dangerous activities? Let's first talk about the 3 weeks, dangerous activities in 3 weeks. We'll talk about the source of that, and we'll discuss we'll discuss in general the topic about dangerous activities as they affect us all this year round. The pasuk says in Karim, "Mizei rav u'lekumei rasha v'ketzav b'ri v'shem behema sashla akvam im chuma sofei apra." The pasuk says in Torah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to send famine to us, there's going to be fever, and we're going to have ketzav meriri. We're going to have a bitter plague. What is this bitter plague? So Rashi says ketzav meriri is a type of shade, a type of supernatural being, a type of mazik that can affect a person that Hashem is going to send against us. And with this in mind, let's look at the Medrash Rabbah in Eicha. The Medrash says in Eicha Rabasi Parakala, Korod Fei Sigua Bein HaMitzarim, that our enemies will pursue us during the straits. And we know that we referred this time they were as Bein HaMitzarim, between Tisha B'Av and Shavas Tammuz. B'Yoman Da'aka B'Shavas Tammuz Tishbav. These are the days from the 17th of Tammuz until the 9th of Av. What does it say? Says the Medrash, Shebahem Ketzav Meriri Matzoi. This time of sakana, of danger, where the shade and the negative influences are most powerful, exists from the 17th of Tammuz, says the Medrash, until the 9th of Av. The Gemara in Sachem Chukir Aleph talks about the time of danger even beginning from Rosh Tammuz, going forward to Tisha B'Av, and this is cited by the Bir Halacha, or Vaja, taking the Chasma Vaja, that this is a time where there is more danger and there's greater issues for the Jewish people. What are some not the halacha that are cited by the post of things that should be avoided or looked out for during this time? The first is based on the Rokeach, citing of a Midbar Rabbah. You shouldn't walk alone during the 4th hour of the day until the 9th hour of the day. Because whatever that means, from the 4th hour of the day to the 9th hour of the day, this is the time where Ketzav Meriri runs wild, where its strength is the worst. And this would include the period during the 3 weeks. And this is actually cited halacha by the Shulchan Aruch, the Talmud of the Ralph and the Shulchan, that one should not walk alone from the 4th hour of the day until the 9th hour of the day. Is anybody here careful about this? No? Anybody at all? So let's explain why perhaps you're not so careful about this. First of all, the first exception to the rule might be the Eishlav Rav. The B'Shacha Rav says, he says this whole discussion, not going alone, doesn't apply in a place where people are around in the city. We're talking about your boy yourself, walking on a country road, there's nobody there. That's what we're talking about. But if you're in the city, there's people around you, so there's no problem whatsoever. And this is what the Aruch HaShulchan says, the Aruch HaSchaim, the Speaker of, the Kuti Mariach, the Chazon Ish all say this whole Siman Shofar doesn't apply when there are people around. The third exception is that the Sodra Shuba writes that the Gimel, that it doesn't apply to a Dvar Mitzvah. If you have to walk alone somewhere between the 4th and 9th hour of the day, and it's for a mitzvah, none of this applies, and that's 100% permissible. Finally, the Yashim is Kon Yasha Yish, that say the same thing in Kon Salachas, the same Shem Shlosh Hametsky, that we're not careful about this nowadays, either because, as we'll talk about in a moment, Shomer Pesayim Hashem, people simply don't care about these things, or we're simply not worried about changing nowadays, and therefore it's not applicable. So that's Siman Shulchan Aruch, cut out, doesn't apply, and we don't have to worry about walking alone during the 3 weeks. The second thing that's cited al pi halacha is the Shibal Halakha. The Shibal Halakha, one of the great Rishonim. So he says that because sakana exists during this time, you may not perhaps if this was your policy, you may not strike a child. You cannot machanech a child during the 3 weeks by hitting them during this time period because of the high level of sakana. And that Saib Halakim Shulchan Aruch in Sif Yud Ches Mechayadam says you can't even hit with the belt, not even with your open hand. You can't hit with the belt, and it applies to your own children, says the Malush. And this is Saib Halakim Poskim, Kids Shulchan Aruch, other scholars as well. Now, the Pri Megadim says maybe it only applies between the 4th and the 9th hour of the day. That's what the Pri Megadim says. But the Tosafos Chaim says we should manage all the time during this period. The poskim add that maybe you should not interrupt when there's a mezuzah, because the mezuzah is a makom of shira. And Neishal Ram says you can hit a child if the mezuzah is in the room. L'maisa nowadays, I think goes without saying, this man has that. We do not hit children. The chinuch does not work anymore. It's not effective. It's not going to be an effective thing. A person who's going to hit all of them, say nowadays, that a person needs to be extremely careful. You have to know they're not doing it from past, not doing it from anger. A person has to know that he's not doing it in revenge of the child. He has control, and therefore always better to sit on the side of caution and perhaps not do this at all, not even during the 3 weeks, but even other 365 days of the year as well. The third halacha is cited in the Medrash Eicha and Perek Aleph, that there's a type of sakana to walk from the sun into the shade. There's some sort of mystical sakana, the person who walks from the sun into the shade. Certainly during the heat wave we had last week, many people want to walk from the sun into the shade. And this is cited by Yerab and the Mishabura. Lamaisa, it's unclear what the sakana is. The minhag is not like this. We go from shade to sun, from sun to shade all the time, even during the 3 weeks. Number 4, unless the first 4 things are not, the first 2 things are not as practical. Let's turn out some more practical sakana issues during the 3 weeks. There are a number of svarim of Talmidim of Moshe Feinstein who quote B'Shem Rav Moshe that you're allowed to have surgery during the 3 weeks, even if it's an elective surgery. Even if it's not emergency, it's elective surgery. Even if it can be postponed until afterwards. They say B'Shem Rav Moshe that you're allowed to have surgery during the 3 weeks. In Masoresh Moshe, Rabbi Tzadok writes Chelek Aleph that Rav Moshe felt one should be machmir if possible during the 9 days because of the mazel, which we'll talk about later on. On the other hand, most poskim say, so Yaakov Kamenetsky and Tzitzel Yezro Vangio say, and Rov poskim all say that one should try to not have surgery during the 3 weeks. If you can push it off until afterwards, that would be the preferable thing because the high sakana during the time to go under anesthesia, to be in a hospital, all kinds of level of sakana, and therefore it's probably a better thing to push off as soon as possible during this time period. Let's now discuss swimming, things like that. When it comes to swimming, going on a limb, it's not a problem if there's no chashash sakana. The Moshe is according to Shmais of the Moshe, the Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and Shlomo. All of these people allow swimming as long as it's safe. You follow protocols, you have a lifeguard, you have a life jacket. As long as you're being safe, it's okay to go swimming. Something inherently dangerous about swimming, as long as the person is acting according to the proper policies as well. The other issue that's raised during this time period is the Reya Mazda, the bad Gemara. We all know the first part of this Gemara because it has to do with Purim. When Purim comes in, when Av comes in, we lower the simcha. Amar Yehuda Breder Shmuel Bar Shilas B'Shmei Rav. Kashem Shemich Nichnas Av the match in the simcha. Just like when Av comes and lower the simcha, Kach Mishnichnas Av Amar the simcha. Amar Papa Hilka Bar Yisrael Dinisle Dina Badei Nachri. During this time period, a Jew who has a din Torah court case with a guy should push it off. Don't have it during this time period because you have bad mazel. Don't go to court during this period. After Rosh Chodesh Av. Better to do it in other, better time you have good mazel. This is Side Allah and Top and Aleph. But Abraham says it lasts all the way to Rosh Chodesh Elul. If that's the case, and Mishnah says if need be, you have a court case, you can have it after Tisha B'Av, that would be fine. They quote B'Shem Rav Feinstein. It doesn't apply regarding the din between 2 Jews. It's not between a Jew and a guy, and not between 2 Jews. Regarding going on an airplane, They say they call it the Feinstein's being lenient. However, most posting say they should only get on a plane during the period of Reya Mazla, during this period of bad mazel, if there's a necessity. With Yaakov Kamenetsky and Mr. Yaakov said it should only be done in the L'Shem Mitzvah, like Yud Ain, visiting Eretz Yisrael, for Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and the Shalmei Moed says it's allowed to come up to Eretz Yisrael, not to be Levatel Seder in Yeshiva. If it's going to be better for learning, you have to get on a plane as well. The Yeshua allows flying for Parnasa with 4 things like that. The Shita of most posted is, unless it is necessary, starting from Rosh Chodesh Av, a person should not get on a plane unless there's a need. It shouldn't be for vacation, it shouldn't be for no reason, it should only be for tzara in order to get on the plane. Some people want to know, is there a problem to have fun during the 3 weeks? Are you allowed to do fun activities? I get the shayla a lot from a lot of the camps in the Long Island area. Can they do fun activities with the kids during the weeks? Can they go on fun trips? Or do you have to be sad during this time period? So the Shimon Yaleket says, he says you shouldn't have a lot of simcha during this time period. The Aliyah Rabbah cites the Maharil, who says also you shouldn't do too many fun things. And the Mishnah Berurah hints to a similar idea in Siman Tafkuf Tzadi Gimel. But if you look in the Sharat Siyah, at the end of Siman Tafkuf Aleph, the Chavetz Chaim says, "The emes eini roa tam Aliyah Rabbah." I don't understand the reason of the Aliyah Rabbah. The Gemara of this card came to Shnechas and the Matzah simple of a kodesh. Says the Chavetz Chaim, you're right. From Rosh Chodesh Av until Shvav, you should try to set your fun, extra fun activities, extra fun trips, things like that. But during the rest of the 3 weeks, not a problem. There's no such concept as the Chavetz Chaim of not doing fun things during the time before the 9 days. Okay, so this is a general overview, the kitzur of the halachas related to sakana, fun, and mazel during the 2 weeks and 9 days. Let's take a step back and talk about sakana in general, engaging activities that carry a certain threshold, a certain sakana, danger that comes along with it. What does the Torah say about that? People like to know about skydiving, people want to know about dangerous activities, things that come with a little excitement. Are these things permissible? Not permissible in the eyes of Allah. Let's look at the Gemara, the Maseches Brachos Daf Lamed Beis. Ma'aseh b'chassid echad shayim mispal b'dar. They tell the story of a chassid who had to daven while he was traveling. So an officer, a sar, some sort of governor came by, riding on his horse, and he saw this Jew, and he said, "Nasan l'shalom." He said, "Good morning, Jew. How are you?" But the chassid didn't respond. Why? Why not? He was in the middle of davening. He didn't want to speak. Him to watch to see him to us and wait until he finished. But after he was davening on Allah. So the officer said to him, "Reka, you empty fool. Doesn't say in your Torah. You have to be careful with yourself. You have to protect your nefesh. You got to protect yourself." And it says, you have to be very careful in guarding your nefesh. When I said good morning to you, why didn't you respond back to me? Aleichem shalom. If I would have gone and taken my sword and cut your head off, who would have come and claimed your blood against me? Meaning, they would have no claim against you. I have all the power and the rights in the world to kill you on the spot. A chutzpah. You don't say good morning, but I killed you on the spot. You should know better the power that I have, what I could have done to you, and you put your life in danger. A terrible mistake and foolish chassid. Now, that is the source. This is the source in the Gemara. In a couple of other places, but this is the source where the Gemara quotes the pasuk, the famous pasuk of the Shmar Tzman B'Sasher Seichem. You have to protect your life. What's the problem with citing that pasuk? Anybody know what the problem with citing that pasuk? No? Nobody know about the Bali Kriya here? What's going on in that pasuk? Anybody know what it's talking about? Okay, so I'm going to help you out. Let's look at the Maharsha. The Maharsha did know Chumash, and he knows what's going on in the context of that pasuk. Let's look at the Maharsha and that pasuk. Says the Maharsha, First of all, very chashuv, a guy knows That's very good. He knows his Bible. And then he says, this pasuk they're quoting, look at the context. It's talking about not forgetting Torah, not protecting your neshama. The third paragraph, a person who forgets his learning, he's chayiv misa, he was chayiv benafsh shlema rakish lefach kosher pasuk. The famous pasuk that we like to bandy about when talking about doing safe things. That's talking about not making an avodah zarah. That's talking about protecting your spiritual soul. It's not talking about protecting yourself physically. It's not talking about physical danger. The Gemara in Shavuos says it's talking about not cursing someone. Where does the Gemara get off? Or where does this guy, this officer, get off saying, this is a pasuk that's telling not to dangerous things? The whole context of the pasuk is not talking about skydiving or things like that. It's talking about protecting your neshama, not engaging in going off the derech. That's what it's speaking about. That's the question of Marsha. Nevertheless, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch at the end of Pasuk, as the source would say, where so comes the Pashos, any single time there's a possibility of putting your life in danger, mitzvahs, essay, last zero, there's an impossible mitzvah to remove it. Ulishameri meaning to stay away from it. Lizar b'davar yafa yafa, and to be very, very careful with it, as it says, Yishaver l'cha shlanashecha, you know, history, if you don't remove it. Ve'iniach hamishkolas hamavin le'sakana. And you go and you do something dangerous. You violated a pasuk commandment, and you violated the pasuk of putting blood in your home. So, what's the point over here? First of all, the person will say, Chazal didn't say this. This guy came over to Strasha. Who made the Gemara? Chazal made the Gemara. So it's obvious if Chazal, the Ravina and Ravashi, the editors of the Gemara, put this story in with this pasuk, it's clear they hold that this is something we should learn from. It's also clear that this is a dinda raisa Torah commandment to not do very dangerous things. And it's also clear that even if I do something dangerous and then I also survive, it doesn't make it okay. Right? You can't go into an irresponsible, dangerous situation and then come out on the skin and say, but I made it through, so clearly Hashem loves me. That's not how it works. You still did something dangerous, no matter what happens at the end of that event. Okay? So this is the source, this is the foundation.
Who decides what's dangerous?
Excellent. We're moving there. We're going piece by piece. We're building piece by piece. Let's look at the continuation of that Gemara. Okay? The next source is the next part of that Gemara. Look what the Gemara says. Amar Allah. So the Chassid says to the officer, wait, I'm going to calm you down, put your sword away, I'm going to make everything better. Amar Allah. He says, let's I was standing in front of a human being. And one of your friends came and said hello to me. I should respond to you. No, I'm talking to the king. Amar Allah, you're right. And if I was in the middle talking to the king, and you came by and interrupted me and the king talking, what would happen to you? The king would cut my head off. That's what would happen. Is it not a kavachomer? If you say the same thing that I'm standing in front of the king who's human being, who's here today but gone tomorrow, I'm standing in front of the creator of the universe, the most powerful king that was, is, and will be. How much more so? Obviously, I'm going to stop talking to Hashem to talk to you, bag of bones and flesh and blood, and that's it? Of course not. The officer calmed down, and the chassid went home in peace. Asks the Taz, and the Orachaim Siman Samach Vav. The chassid responded to the threat of the officer by telling the officer, wait, I can explain myself. What a chutzpah. How can he speak in such a way? Oh, wait, I'm going to convince you. How can he go and say, but I know better. The guy has a sword, and he threatens to cut off your head. If I were the chassid, I'd have been like, you're right, I'm sorry, have a good day. Officer, please give me my ticket. And you're like, we'll end it over here. But this guy does everything they tell us not to do in traffic school. He starts engaging with the officer. What are you doing today? It wasn't true. I was doing it on my phone. I was just putting it away. I was just checking something. It's an emergency. My wife's going to have a baby. Well, he starts playing around the officer. If he was smart, he would have closed his mouth and walked away. Says the Taz, what was he doing? So the Taz says that he was aware that by law, he had the right to defend himself from the minister. That's what the Taz says. I have the right to my day in court. I'm allowed to defend myself so I don't get in trouble. The Magen Avraham says similarly. It must be that the officer, that the chassid was so confident in his skills of persuasion that he knew he'd be able to calm down the officer. Now, both the Taz and the Magen Avraham are very strange. What's strange? What's strange about the Taz and Magen Avraham? How can he be so sure that the Sar was telling the truth that he threatened to decapitate the chassid? Meaning, you're still starting up with the guy who's ready to kill you. How does that answer? You're going to be so sure they're going to start up with this guy. So I want to suggest the answer I saw in a different sefer. It's from the Mishnas Yaakov. Mishnas Yaakov in his Aros and Orachaim and Simon Kubtal. Mishnas Yaakov is Yaakov Aronsi. He was one of the leading poskim in Galitsky in the beginning of the 1800s. So the Mishnas Yaakov says that the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, Lo Am Haaretz Rashid. If this guy was a chassid, then he can't be an Am Haaretz. That's what it says. He clearly knows how to work. So what was his reasoning al pi halacha? He says it makes much more sense to say that the chassid was simply unaware of his surroundings while down, meaning he had no idea what was going on. He wasn't making cheshbonos. He wasn't trying to outsmart this officer. He simply had no idea. Look at the words of the Shulchan Aruch in Simon Ches. How does a chassid daven? When a person who's a real chassid davens, there's his spashtus agashtus. They're totally not in this world, totally unaware of their surroundings or what's going on. Says the Mishnas Yaakov, this chassid, even if he heard something, he had no concept of what's going on. He didn't know the minister was speaking to him. He didn't realize that he was in trouble. He didn't realize that his life was being threatened. He heard like blah 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 blah, and he's in the middle of Shema Esrei. He's connected to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Afterwards, he has to explain himself why he wasn't doing anything close to there. But he's simply saying, I have no idea. How do I know that this is the case? That a current person could be davening and have no idea. We actually find it in the Yerushalmi, the end of Titus, that relates to the period that we're in. The Yerushalmi in Titus tells the story of Elazar Modai. Elazar Modai davened with such kavan and such intensity that the Romans couldn't defeat Bar Kokhba and his army because the intense davening of Elazar Modai. What happened? One of the spies went and he set up a plan to ensnare and to entrap Elazar Modai. He went pretended he was whispering something in his ear. And Bar Kokhba heard a rumor that the spy from the other side was a Modayin. And he said to him, I heard you were conversing with the spy from the enemy. And Elazar Modai said, what are you talking about? I have no idea. And that's the truth. He had no idea. His tefillos were so intense. He was so in tune with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. There was such hispashtus agashmius. But Elazar Modai was unaware of what was going on around him. And Bar Kokhba said, but I have proof. And they report that he was whispering in the ear, and you were in communication with him. And Elazar Modai continued to deny it. And Bar Kokhba was so upset that he kicked Elazar Modai, the holy Tana, and he died from the injuries. And the Gemara in the end of time says, Yerushalmi says, And once Rabbi Madai stopped davening, that led to the end of the city, Beitar, and Beitar was destroyed because they had no more Sekuyos, and the davening Rabbi Madai. That's how we see how far a person's davening can go, that they're unaware of what's around them and the fallout of such a thing could be. So we pass on halacha, you can't put yourself in danger. So the question was asked, how do you define sakana? What's dangerous? What's not dangerous? How do we quantify this? Right? Is a person, we all assume you were allowed to take calculated risks. We walk down the streets, we get in our cars, we leave our homes in the morning, we use our ovens, we all take calculated risks. Right? The safest thing you can do when it comes to traveling is to walk. Walking is probably the safest thing. But eventually, bicycles were developed, and then scooters were made, and then there was motorcycles, and electric scooters, and electric bikes. All of these things are more dangerous than walking, without question. Does it mean it's usher to do them? So I think it's hard to argue such a thing. No, because if you use all of these devices responsibly, and you follow the traffic laws, and you wear a helmet, and you ride in a responsible, reasonable way, then you're taking a calculated risk, and it's permissible to do something that carries a remote danger for the sake of quality of life. It's the push of thing, and unfortunately, we need to say it. We have to make sure we're wearing helmets when we ride our bikes, and our children are wearing helmets. It's so foolish to send them a child. We have to be mindful. People say, "Oh, how my friends are doing it, and it's not cool, and it's annoying." It doesn't matter. It's so not worth the risk that a person should go out in such a way and put himself in such a sakana. That would be a violation of Shmar Tzom Sefer, to not dress properly and to not follow the laws and to use them properly in the streets. That could be usher. That's not a calculated risk. That's irresponsible. That's a problem. But if a person is following the rules and the regulations, and they're working with experts, and they're doing what they're supposed to do, and they're acting in a safe manner, a person is allowed to take a calculated risk and to go out into the world. Is it a problem to go skydiving? Is it a problem to go on safari with lions and tigers and to stand there when a lion is 15 feet away from you? Is that a thing that's usher? Probably not. As long as you follow the rules, you listen to the guides, you follow the expectations, that's fine. Is it okay to go to the Bronx Zoo and to jump into the lion's cage and start messing around and fool yourself? No, that's a fool. That's a dumb thing to do. But to follow the perfectly okay, because the experts say that it's safe and it's statistically okay. The Noda B'Yehuda, the Chatzka Landau, the chief rabbi of Prague, has a well-known shuva in Madura Tenyani Rodesim Ratio. He was asked whether it's mutter to go hunting. Why? Because in that time period, in Prague, all of the noblemen, all of the fancy people, instead of getting nice cars or whatever we would do nowadays, they would go hunting. That was their shtick. They would go hunting. And some of the wealthy Jews of Prague wanted to know, could they go with their non-Jewish noble friends and go hunting? So he says, first of all, I don't think hunting is such a nice thing for a nice Jewish boy. We only find two hunters in all of Chumash. One is Nimrod and the other is Esau. Is that who you want to hang out with? Is that like your role model? Hunting just for sport and not for food is certainly something not for a nice Jewish boy. But then he tells us as follows: You go into the forest and you put yourself in sakana. With wild animals. And the Torah says, how could a Jew go put himself in an untrained wild situation with wild animals? If a person needs the animal to kill it for its flesh and its meat in order to be able to sustain himself, that's fine. A person's allowed to go overseas on a boat to travel in dangerous waters in order for business because you got to make a parnasa. For parnasa, a person's allowed to do it. The halacha is that a person is allowed, who works in the field, is allowed to eat while they're taking from the produce they're picking. Why? Because the guy who's working in the field is putting his life on the line. He's the one climbing the trees. He's the one working in the hot sun while you're sitting back in the office. He's allowed to take food. The Torah says he's putting life on the line. That's permissible for the sake of Parnasa. But this guy who just has too much time in his hands and can't get a chavrusa, so he needs to go hunt, wild animals. This person violates it, and he goes to the Rambam. You can't go to a dangerous place. And you're not allowed to do this. Again, there's multiple makom for Parnasa, but why should you put yourself in sakana just for fun? A person has a seichel hayashar, a God-given intellect that dictates how we act and what we do. Skiing, riding a bike, cliff jumping, they're all more dangerous than walking. I think we can all agree to that. But a person is allowed to take a calculated risk for the sake of enjoying quality of life. And a person goes skiing, it would make sense that yes, if you go on the trails that you know how to ski, and you wear the proper ski equipment, and you're responsible, and you do all things you're supposed to do, the calculated risk in skiing is a normal percentage that one is allowed to take into account in order to have a certain quality of life. The Gemara in a few places introduces the concept of Shomer Pesayim Hashem, right? That Hashem protects the fools. An activity that's routinely done and is not considered dangerous by the public. Dashu Be'Rabit, says the Gemara. The public walk over it. They kind of ignore this dangerous thing. Shomer Pesayim Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows it and sees to it that people will not be unnecessarily harmed by this danger. What's the get? So the Gemara in Bracha says that if you go through the desert or you go over the dangerous seas, a person's bench is going. That's the Gemara. So we all know bench and going, right? Asks the Achronim, we have a bit of a paradox here. A person benches Gomel by going over dangerous seas, and he benches Gomel when he comes to the desert. But what's the question? Who gave him permission to go over seas in the first place? And who gave him permission to go through the dangerous desert? So the Achronim struggle with this question, and they come out with different mahal. The Rav Yaakov Edlinger writes in Binyan Sion that risk is allowed as long as it's less than 50% chance. Now that is a very, very high number. That means if there's only a 49% chance of you dying, you can do whatever you want according to Rav Yaakov Edlinger. Most posts can reject this idea. That's very, very dangerous. Essentially, you have a 1 in 2 chance of dying. Therefore, it's possible. So they reject that idea, and they say it's probably closer to a miyad hamatsu. Meaning, if the level of mortality rate is 1 in 10%, then it's something you're not allowed to do. But if mortality rate is not that, then a person will be allowed to. And it has to be something as well that's unexpected. I wouldn't see it coming. If I wouldn't see it coming, and there's a very, very low rate, then there's room to discuss doing such a thing. The Tshuva Shem Aryeh in Yordes Simchav Zion says that the Heter Shomer Pesayim Hashem applies when the risk is socially acceptable, and people would take such a risk for their parnasa. And he says that the risk needs to be shayach to you. If you are not someone who's qualified to travel in that place, then that degree of sakana is a problem, and there's no heter of Shomer Pesayim Hashem. Meaning, if you don't need to go for parnasa on that venture, for that thing, then you're not allowed to go if there's a risk involved. Let's tie it back, for example, to skiing, okay? Or, cliff jump, okay? Is jumping out of an airplane permissible? Perhaps. Again, the death rate of jumping out of an airplane is very, very low. I'm not advocating anybody to do this, but the rate of mortality is very, very low. If you go with an expert, everything is checked, everything is responsible, it's fine. But if you're not going to say I'm going to jump out of an airplane, but I'm going to do it on my own, without any training, and I'm not going to watch a video, I'm not going to do it, then that's foolish. That's not showing beside Hashem. You are a pesi, and you're going to kill yourself. That's not what the pasuk is talking about. It has to be within the calculated risk that's manageable and understood in such a situation as well. If a person wants to go skiing, and they have only been skiing twice, and they want to go off the trail without a helmet and in bad weather, Shomer Pesayim Hashem, I'm going skiing. That's not true. You're being irresponsible. You're not following the protocols. You're inexperienced. You have no hesitation to put yourself in that place. So again, the rule that we want to walk away with from here is that a person is allowed to take a calculated risk in a low-risk situation if you're being responsible, you're following the rules, and you're well-equipped. There's no clear method. I can't sit here tonight and tell you A, B, C, D, and that's it. You can do whatever you want. You have to follow the rules and the regulations, the safety experts and the authorities, and follow sound medical advice. There are certain things that are definitely clear that we need to be aware of. In now this day and age, to have to go around and say that it's a shiloh whether smoking is us or not, we're past that point. It's a double question that smoking kills people. There are very, very few rabbanim alive nowadays who give out that smoking. We cannot say shomer b'sayim Hashem. There's no shmir over there. The tshuva of Rav Moshe of the 1970s, even if David finds that it doesn't apply anymore, smoking is certainly assur. To go boating, Rahman al-San, we hear every single summer, unfortunately. To go boating without a life jacket, to go boating in waters you're not equipped to go through, and to not follow the Coast Guard's direction, and the Bachrim go out being Azmanim, and they want to go for a chavaya, they want to go for a fun thing, and they're not following the rules. They're mamish putting themselves in rock and sakana, and they put other people sakana who have to go after them and save them because they want to have fun instead of following the rules. A person goes camping or hiking without consulting the experts, having enough water, bringing a compass along, knowing what they're doing, leaving the trails. Every single summer we hear that they're sending people into the forest to look for children, to look for adults, to look for teenagers who weren't careful. It's mamish sakana to not follow these things. You can have a fun time and also follow the rules as well. Life jackets, all these things have to be mandatory. That I think is the kisser, the general approach al pi halach. I just want to end with a small dvar machshava, just to tie it back to Perin, and then we'll conclude. The pasuk says in Mishlei, "Sinim pachim b'derech keishom enav sheyach me'ah." You have to stay away from people who are crooked, people who are rishayim. And the Ramak, Rav Moshe Cordovero, says that a tzaddik is on a boat with people who are chayav midinei shemayim, people whose lives are being judged by shemayim because of their averos. That tzaddik can drown because of those people. Ask from the Chaim Friedlander from the Sisei Chaim. Why is that fair? Why is it fair that the tzaddik is on a boat with people who are chayiv b'nafsho, people who are chayiv because of their averos, he should be punished? And he explains that when a person is b'makom sakana, a place of danger, he needs more merit in order to be saved than a regular situation. The Gemara in Shabbos says a person should not put himself in b'makom sakana because he's not going to have the proper zechuyos in order to get saved from that situation. The Gemara gives an example: a woman in childbirth needs extra zechuyos and tefillos in time of sakana. And the Gemara Menachos tells us that when there's a time of midas hadin, be'idan riska, a person who doesn't wear tefillin or tzitzis, they will be judged harshly for not fulfilling mitzvos when they could have during the time of midas hadin, be'idan riska. That's what the Malach told Rav Katina. The same idea applies to Bein HaMetzayim. There are times we participate in possibly dangerous activities during the year, but a Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us a level of Shomer B'Sayim Hashem. For the other days of the year, a person can push the boundaries and do potentially risky, high risk things that would put a person in B'Makom Sakana perhaps. And a person has the level of protection. But during Bein HaMetzayim, he says, or Friedlander and say the other Baal Machshava, there's a time of din, it's a time of tragedy. And the extra zechuyos we need that come along with Shomer B'Sayim Hashem, they're lacking. And during these days, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is more strict in the Midas Hadin, and perhaps one does not have the necessary zechuyos. And this explains the Ramak. If there's a storm at sea and the boat is in danger, then the Midas Hadin affects everybody present. Doesn't matter if you're in Samak or Russia. There's Midas Hadin. The Satan is mekashrik the shas sakana. The Satan is dancing around you when there's sakana. And the judgment on the regular person is not because he's hanging out with Rishayim, but rather it's because Rishayim bring a Midas Hadin. And the tzaddik needs zechuyos to overcome that Midas Hadin at that time. The 3 weeks are a time of historical misfortune. Many tragedies, so many calamities befell the Jewish people. Shiras Haluchos, Moshe Migdal Azav, the burning of the sacred Torah, Apostolos, the second Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of both Beis HaMikdash, Jews from Spain, Tisha B'Av in 1492, World War I, all of these things occurring during this time period. There's tremendous midas hadin during this time. And therefore, we need to assume that that extra leeway that a Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us when we push the boundaries, we take risks. Who says that leeway is going to be there during this time of midas hadin? So I want to end here, according to Rabbi Soloveitchik, in his introductory remarks to his Kinos. He says that Hester Panim, when Hashem is hidden from us, is a chief disaster that affected us. That was the biggest issue. The separation or distance between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Yisrael. We are too far from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We want to be near, closer to him. And he says that sometimes he is close and sometimes he is a hidden place to which we have no access. The Hester Panim is mentioned only once in Chumash. Haster Asir Panai, Bayomahu, and he goes on to quote the Gemara Bava Kama, the state where God does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, and this refers to the same Hester Panim. When there's a time of Hester Panim and things are not clear, Tzaddik and Rasha are sometimes judged in the same way, and they're affected with the same punishments. And therefore, since this is a time period of Hester Panim during this period, we have to be so careful how we use our Zechuyos not to push that. The halachos of danger and fun during this time are meant to focus us on the Hester Panim, to bring us closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and what the truth is and the way a Jew should live properly, and to focus on the real things. And our avodah, as the 3 weeks continues to recognize the Hester Panim, understand it, and begin the process of removing it. Thanks so much, everybody.